Basically, this week we're talking about different hive types and where to position hives, where to position your apiary, and all that sort of thing. So it's as you can see, there are quite a few variants, but I'll show you a few more. We've just let somebody in. Basically, beekeeping goes back a hell of a long way, and this is a cave painting in northern Spain, Valencia. Sorry, I don't know whether that's northern Spain or not. And it's 6,000 years BC, just to show you how long ago people were collecting honey. And this is a man up a tree, supposedly, and this is a hole in the tree and inside of the bees. And in fact, there are a couple outside as well, although they look to be about the size of spaniels. But he's collecting honey and putting it in this bag, and then he'll climb down again. Just to show you how little things have changed in 8,000 years, this photograph was taken in 2015 in the Himalayas. And that's a man up a ladder with a basket on a rope, and he is spearing the combs of honey, which these are, and he's cutting them off, putting them in the basket, and they get hauled to the top of the cliff. And he's got a fire at the bottom of the cliff, and you can see on the right-hand side here, there's a load of smoke, and that's hopefully calming the bees. But he's wearing absolutely no protection whatsoever, apart from a face scarf. He's got bare hands, bare feet, and people do die doing this, as is probably no surprise. Why go to all this trouble? And that's the simple answer. Up until the late 18th century, sugar was virtually unavailable, and the only source of sweetening anything was honey. And people started to collect and hunt bees and honey. And before there were hives, bees lived in trees in the UK and in Europe. And this is a photograph taken not so long ago of a knot hole in a tree, and the inside of the tree is hollow, and bees are quite happily living in there. And this is a tree that's been felled and was hollow, and this is honeycomb, and there was a colony of bees living in there. I apologize for that. It's my sense of humor. It's not very good, but it's mine. And then people discovered that what they could do was saw a log in half and hollow it out and put it up in a tree, and that way it would attract bees and they could collect the honey from a known hive. They knew where it was. They didn't have to go hunting for it. The bees would come to them. Then they decided to lower them down a bit, and you can see now there's a hole there on the split of the log, and this is called a log gum hive. And then they went a bit further and decided to put them on the ground and give them a bit of shelter, which is basically what we do now. This is the next step up. This is called a skep, which is an old German word, not modern German, for basket. And basically it's woven straw or brambles or whatever you can find, rushes, reeds, bound together, in this case with rattan, but in the UK, they used to use split bramble to do this, the long strands of bramble you get, and they would split them up the middle and use those for weaving, and then carve a hole for the bees to go in and out. Slightly more up to date, this is the same thing, but it's standing on a floor with an opening built into it. And I don't think much of his stand that's going to fall over if it gets filled with honey, but it was common practice up until the late 19th century. And if you go to the Lost Gardens of Heligan, there are still bees kept in skeps there, and there's a wall with holes in which are called bee bowls. And this is looking inside a skep, and you can see that the honeycomb's been built all over the place, but they leave channels between the comb, and I'll come back to those in a minute, but I want you to remember them, because apart from at road junctions and gaps like here, they're pretty much a regular size, and that's quite important. And this is a dear friend of Joe and mine, David Charles, who very sadly died at the age of 85 on New Year's Eve. And he used to, once a year, do this, which is called driving the bees. And this is the basket I took the other photograph of. And in order to get the honey, this is a bit of a development, and I'm going to go backwards in a minute. They would tap the bottom basket, and all the bees would go up into the top basket, and you can just see a little trail of them doing it there. And that would mean there are no bees in this one. You would then start this as your new colony and take this one away to get the honey out. But hives, there were a variety of them, sort of trying new things. They're all varieties of the same thing, really. They are baskets or boxes with bars like this on the top of the container, and the bees built comb on the bars. But every year they had to take the comb out and destroy it to get the honey. The theory was that the queen laid in one part of the hive and the honey was deposited in another, but it's not always the case, and a lot of young brood of honeybees was destroyed. But adding extra compartments helped this considerably because that gave the queen more room to lay and more room for the honey, and they became more separated. But there was still destruction of the brood and the eggs and the larvae and so on. Then removable frames came along, which meant you could take out a frame at the time and choose which ones to take the honey from and which ones to leave. And then a thing called a queen excluder was added. Now this is basically a grill that is small enough for the workers to get through, but also stops the queen from getting through because she's bigger and drones can't get through either. But the workers can go into that part of the hive and to deposit honey, leaving the queen to lay eggs in the original part where she was. And that way you don't have to destroy so much brood and larvae and so on. And those are today called top bar hives. And the ones that we see an awful lot of these days are called African top bar hives or Kenyan top bar hives. And they're called that for a reason. They're used an awful lot in Africa, and basically there are lots of bars along the top, which I'll show you in a minute, under the roof. The bees build the comb down and they go right along, and you can put a queen excluder in the middle. You can also divide the hive and have an entrance at each end. But everybody I know who's tried it has had not brilliant success with them, and they are very flimsy and prone to weather ingress and that sort of thing. Some people get away with it, some people use them reasonably successful, but I would seriously try and start with something conventional and then move away from it after you've got a little bit of experience, and you can experiment and try different things. They have, as I said, have top bars which all touch. So across the top inside, you've virtually got, they've taken that frame out, but you've virtually got continuous wood across the top of the hive. And you can see how the bees build the comb down from that top bar. And this is a hive that was started by one of our beginners about 10 years ago now. And she put the bees in with just the top bars, and they started to draw comb like this. But there's a problem that you might be able to see. She's cutting this bar away from this one because the bees have put the comb at this side of the bar at this end, and it's on this side of the bar at the other end. And you can't easily get the bees to draw comb in a straight line downwards from the bars. You can put starter strips in, and she's given them a helping hand here to show where to go. That's a little starter strip, and the bees should have gone straight down from there. But unfortunately, they didn't. And this is one that was featured on Countryfile about 7-8 years ago. And I forgot the name of the girl who was demonstrating it. So she's not on Countryfile anymore. but it's called the Sun Hive, or the Weissenpfeifener Hangenkorb. I nearly got that right. The bees go in the bottom, and as this, you can see they go in here, and you can break the hive in half to take the honey out, but it's non-interventionist beekeeping, and really you're stuck when it comes to inspecting your bees, and other than looking at the entrance, and you can't look into the comb because you can't see between it, as with the skep. And if you've got a lot of money to spend, you can buy one of these. It's an omelette bee house. They do a chicken house as well. This one is now between £600 and £700. That's the main body of the hive, and you just add boxes on the top. It's a similar setup to our national hives, but it's very, very expensive and was really designed for rooftop beekeeping in cities. This is a cheaper version. I'm smiling. This is called the Zest Hive, and this is made from concrete blocks and has corrugated plastic roofing material on the top, and was invented by an architect from somewhere in Wiltshire, if my memory serves me correctly. And he came and visited us, and it's basically a very large hive indeed. That would be about 4 foot long and about 2 foot wide. And these are the frames that you put in them, similar to our frames, except that it's 3-story. We only use a single-story frame. And this works on the basis or the theory that the bees will put the brood up here and the honey lower down. And they've yet to start on this one, but I can see there's honey there, sealed honey. And this is the good old flow hive from Australia, where you simply put a handle in, turn it, and out, put the handle in there, turn it, and honey comes out of the spouts here. And this is Stuart and Cedar Anderson, who I've spent some time with in Australia and here actually. It's a great idea, and it's a canny piece of engineering, but it's, in my opinion, not really suited to the UK, because we get honey from oilseed rape, which sets in no time at all. And what it does is jam the mechanics of this hive. But it's a nice piece of kit, and Stuart's a nice bloke apart from anything else. I spent Halloween last year, no, not last year, year before, with him and his family at his father's house in Canberra. So he's a nice guy. If you want to go obscure, this is a similar thing to these flow hive, same format, which is the American Langstroth format. But to save people at the bottom getting stung as the bees come and go, they have a chimney, and the bees come out the top of the chimney. It's called a bee pass hive, and it's you can tell by the architecture, it's used by some people in France. And this is Jonathan Powell. He is a natural beekeeper. In fact, he's one of the trustees of the National Beekeeping Trust, and he hollows out live trees and the piece that he cuts out the front here, he saves. He puts bees in there and then puts the front piece of wood back, and the bees live in the tree and they come out through a hole in the piece he puts back. And just to be really obscure, this is one that is on the roof of a McDonald's in Denmark. It's got the prices and everything of the burgers, and I'm not sure where the bees go in and out, but I'm guessing it's through the front doors here. It's done as a publicity gesture, but basically, if you want bees to live in anything, pretty much they will. It's amazing where bees will live. And this is done as an art installation, and it is functioning, but you can see the keys get very dirty. I don't know quite what goes on there, but this girl has been doing this for a few years. Thank you. There's another one. This is one that people like because it's French and because it's got a little bit of history. It's called the Warre hive and was invented by a gentleman, French gentleman by the name of Abbé Warret. He was a priest, and he worked on the principle of stacking boxes higher and higher and higher. And if you want to add, you lift the lot and put a new box underneath. Well, actually, in his book, you don't. You get your two men servants to do it. They lift this lot up and you slide the box underneath. He wrote a book called Apiculture pour tous, which is French for beekeeping for everybody. And the main problem, in most people's opinion, is it's very small. It's only 300 millimeters square. That's a foot, and that is very small indeed. And that's his book. And we have a little saying. Yep. Boom, boom, said somebody. Right. Top bar hives. Generally, the pros of top bar hives, it's a natural way of keeping bees. So say the people who keep bees in top bar hives. People who keep bees in any kind of hive say that their way is the natural way of doing it. But between you and me, there's absolutely nothing natural in keeping bees in a box, no matter whose box it is. Not my boxes, not Joe's boxes, not Eric's boxes. Beekeeping in boxes is not natural. It is less expensive. You can make hives from almost anything. And some people keep them in barrels, plastic barrels cut in half and in a sort of, bucket shape, as it were, and put a lid on those. Bees can and do move into all sorts of crazy places, as Joe will show you next week. The theory is that you just take one bar out when you're inspecting, if you can, if they've not built the comb sideways, so that you're not exposing more than one comb of bees at any one time. The other thing about the long hives is there are no heavy boxes to lift, because a brood box can weigh up to 50 pounds, and a super, and I'll show you the different boxes in a minute, which is where we let the bees deposit the honey, can weigh up to 30 pounds when it's full of honey. So it's quite heavy, and you get 3 or 4 of those, and having to lift them down, it's 120 pounds. It's a lot of weight. All that is true, except for the Warret hive, which it just keeps on stacking up and stacking up. I said earlier that some colonies, and some hives can hold 2 colonies. The zest hive, the concrete one I showed you, and the African top bar hives can hold 2 colonies. And there's a thing called a Dartington hive, which is a sort of mutation of the top bar hives, but with frames, where they have up to 3-4 colonies. And there's an association up north, Loon Valley beekeepers, who've developed their own version of the Dartington hive, and they sell those for about £400 each. You're still into potential destruction of comb and brood in top bar hives, so you have to be very careful what you take. It's difficult to inspect for diseases because not so much with the individual top bar hives, but a lot of people who keep them are non-interventional beekeepers. And we had a talk from a non-interventional beekeeper about 18 months ago. And one of the questions was, how do you find brood disease? Well, brood diseases happen in the comb to the larvae. And she said, well, you look at the entrance. But of course, you can't see what's happening in the combs by looking at the entrance. So you have to be very, very careful what you do. I mean, there are so many problems with bees, which we'll tell you in session 5, that you need to be inspecting them regularly. And treating is difficult as well. We're allowed to use certain medicines for the bees. We used to be able to use an antibiotic, which we can't do now. The only medicines we can use these days are pretty harmless things, and they're not so much medicines, they're miticides, really. They control mites. Queen excluder, that's a question mark. You can put queen excluders in some of them, but a lot of top bar beekeepers choose not to and let the queen decide where she wants to lay. Extracting the honey, you have to take the bars out with the comb on, cut the comb off the bars, and then compress and filter the honey. And it's not as easy as it sounds. You need something like a cider apple press to be able to do that. And you end up with a very, very sticky mass of wax at the end of it. And the other thing is, in the winter, if your bees run short of stores, it's very difficult to feed. It's possible, but it's difficult. And the other problem with top bar hives are what we call leave-alone beekeepers. Because we have problems in this country, bees who are infected with a disease go out and forage for nectar and pollen, and they meet other bees and they pass on the disease. And so not inspecting your bees and leaving them alone it's like the COVID vaccine, you know, or virus. It's not necessarily you that you're worried about. You may be asymptomatic to some of the problems or the virus, but other people's bees may be susceptible, and your asymptomatic bees can go out and pass on the disease to somebody else down the road or within a 5-mile radius. Right, after all that, there was a light bulb moment in America in the mid-1800s regarding a thing called bee space. And Lorenzo Loraine Langstroth discovered, it was almost mid-century exactly, wasn't it, who was also a clergyman and a beekeeper, discovered that bees respect a corridor of 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And as I showed you in that earlier slide with the skep with the comb turned upside down, they will build or leave gaps between the comb of that much. And they will also do double bee spaces, which is precisely double that, 1/2 inch to 3/4. And that is so that 2 bees can pass, because bees are about handily about 1/4 of an inch thick, as it were. We control the space with plastic metal spacers. They're called plastic metal spacers because they used to be metal, now they're plastic. That's in the honey supers, and Hoffman self-spacing frames in the brood chamber. What is a Hoffman self-spacing frame? I'll show you in a minute. Any extra space that is not used in the hive, we put in a flat board called a dummy board, and the bees tend not to go past it. Notice I didn't say don't, but they tend not to. Bee space was born, and all beehives with movable frames now observe the bee space. And that's metric, just in case you want to know, 6.35 to 9.53. Anything bigger, they'll narrow it down. Anything smaller, they'll block it off. And there's the skep again, and that's why I told you to look out for the regularity. That is actually 1/2 inch, because there's 1 bee, and there are 2 bees, and they're working together, and one wants to pass the other. And you can see here there are bees down in the gap, and there will be bees on that surface and bees on that surface working it. And this is a typical frame that we put into a hive. It's got what we call lugs on the end, either end, and these are the spacers that just slot over the end. There are different types of spacers, which I'll show you in a minute. We put in wax foundation with impressions of the cell size the bees will make, and it's reinforced with wire. And this one should have pins there, and there, but it's not been done yet. I'll show you a video in a minute of somebody making up frames. But as I said, any space is left and the bees will fill it with wax. This is what we call burr comb. Because there was too big a gap between the tops of these frames and whatever was above them, the bees have just decided to put wax in there, and they will. And this is the end of the box, and because the gap was too big there, they put wax in there. And if you leave a big gap like this, then they will fill that with comb, and that's called brace comb. Modern hives fall into several categories: single-walled hives, and double-walled hives, and top-bar hives that we've been talking about. This is a double-walled hive. It's called WBC after its inventor, William Broughton Carr, and it's about 150 years old now, and is development of a previous thing called a cottager's hive, and it has a gable roof on the top. Now, gable roofs have disadvantages, and I mean, it's pretty. I've got one of these beside my pond in the garden, but there are no bees in it. And because it's double skinned, it does offer more insulation than a single-walled hive. And inside the outer skin is a box with frames in it, just like there would be in the general purpose national hive. And here's the one that's now beside my pond, with the outer shell taken off and the inner box is showing. And the stand is an integral part of this, and the bees go in and out through here. And you put these back on. I've stacked them up as they came off, but that's the bottom one, that's the next one, and there's the roof. But in order to inspect the hive here, you have to take all these off before you can start. So there's a bit of a disadvantage. You need a lot of space. And there it is, put back together. The bees do overwinter better with the insulation. It keeps damp out as well as the cold. That's important in the winter, especially the type of winter we've had this year. They are very attractive, and people remark on it when they come to my house, because we have a patio outside the door and then a pond beyond that, and the WBC hive is just beyond that, standing on the edge of the pond. There are a lot of components to manipulate before you start. The brood chamber is smaller than the standard hive. It's one less frame, and you really need to add another box on top in order to give the queen enough room to lay in. It's very, very difficult to move if you have to, for any reason, transport it anywhere. It's a nightmare. And quite often the components don't fit very well, because those crazy angles on the outer skin in particular, they tend to warp and twist quite easily. And they're not cheap. 279 to 413. I did check those prices this year. £413 is a lot of money for a beehive in flat pack form. And there is a lot of maintenance. You've got to keep up with painting and coating. You can't use the roof as a stand for supers. I'll talk about that, or Joe will talk about that next week. But if you've got a flat roof on your hive, you can turn it upside down, put it on the floor, and put your boxes on top, to say putting them on the ground, at a 45-degree twist from square, and that will make life very easy for you. And that's the roof I'm on about. Take it off, turn it upside down, don't hit the chicken, but then you can stack these boxes on top of it, because you want to get into this one to inspect your bees, and it acts as a natural stand. You don't leave it that way up, but turn it upside down. And right, I'm going to unshare for a moment, because this is, if I go back, previous, right. This is the national hive that is the standard hive that most beekeepers use in this country. And there are various reasons why you should use it, or advantages to using it. But if I just talk you through it a second, I'm going to slide this over and say, no, I'm not. It's on the share the screen. And here I am. Right, it's a bit difficult to get a full-size hive in here, but to give you an idea, this is the floor of a hive. It's 18¼ inches square. And this is as I say, is the floor. And these days, the vast majority of people use a mesh floor. And then underneath that, they put a wooden or plastic slide, which slides into grooves in this case. Said he having trouble putting it back together. And then that's the mesh side. And in the hive, if you imagine things are dropping all the time from the frames down through the boxes, and they go through this mesh floor and they land on the solid floor underneath, the one I just slid out. And the beauty of that is, by just taking out the slide, you can have a rough idea of what's going on in the hive. If you've got varroa mites and you've treated them and you want to see how many have been killed, you just open the slide without having to open the hive, and you can take it out and count the amount of varroa mites you've killed. This is an entrance block which goes in the front, and you can see that I've got an entrance here, quite a big entrance. You can leave the block out altogether, or put it in and have the large entrance, or spin it through 90 degrees and you have a small entrance, he said. There we go. Nope. That'll do. That's better. Now you've got a small entrance over there. But it's a bit, as I said earlier, it's a bit difficult to demonstrate with that in a confined space. If I got far enough back from the computer, you wouldn't be able to hear what I was saying. So we've seen the floor, and here's my floor, okay, with the entrance there. This is a little model one. And on top of that, we have what we call the brood box, and the brood box has lots of frames inside it. And the thing that's difficult to understand is that there's fresh air running. There's no top or bottom to this box. The frames are suspended in it, and it sits on top of the floor, and the frames are in here, and you can take out a frame. This is clever. I've even got bees, look. There we go. Frame full of bees, except they're not, obviously. But you can take out one frame at a time and manipulate it, and Joe will show you all about that next week. But then to stop the queen laying eggs in the honey, we put on a queen excluder, which is a grill, sometimes in a wooden frame, or sometimes just placed directly on the top of the frames. And then you can put a smaller box on the top, which the bees will go up into through the queen excluder and fill with honey. And on top of that, we put what's called a crown board, and it's a board with the holes in, but that's for our benefit, not the bees. It's got a lip all the way around the edge here with a 1/4 inch upstand, so that the bees won't build wax in there. That goes on the top, and as far as the bees are concerned, that's the ceiling of their hive, and they tend not to come up through the top and build anything up here. And then on top of that, we put the roof. And that is a national hive, and this is a very, very small one, obviously. If I spin it through 45 degrees and take the roof off again, you'll see that there are rails top and bottom. I'll spin it the other way, then it's better light. There are rails top and bottom, and there's a top rail on the bottom box, which means that you can use it as a handle for lifting quite a heavy box. Otherwise, you've got smooth sided boxes, and that's very uncomfortable to lift when it weighs 30 pounds. I'm still here behind the box, by the way. Okay, let's take all that lot off, and right, move that out of the way. Okay, let's go back to the slides. I hope did that make a lot of sense? Nod at me, somebody. Chris? Yeah, okay, good. Let's share the screen again.
Stu, I'm just wondering whether people had actually put you on full size view for that. We ought to perhaps
But
if you do any
anybody
more.
didn't catch that, the video will have it, hopefully. Okay. Right,
Yeah.
so that's what I just showed you. And it's just the terms that I've been using may be foreign to you. Well, they very probably are. The floor is the bit with the meshing I showed you first, and the entrance block. Above that, we've got there's the entrance. And above that, we've got what we call the brood box, because this is where the queen lays all the eggs, and the larvae and pupa are housed, which we call the brood. And above that is the queen excluder, which stops the queen going any further north. And above that, we've got the super. It's called super simply because it's over, as in Western supermare. It's over the brood box. And the frames are smaller, the box is smaller, because it would just be too heavy otherwise. Above that, we've got the crown board, which is, for our purposes, we use it for several things, and that falls into Joe's realm next week, really. And above that, we've got the lid. And you'll notice that it's quite deep because there's an internal rail all the way around the rim, and that leaves about 2-3 inches between the top of the crown board and the underside of the roof, so that you can put things in that space for the bees to use. So we've got brood frames there, a dummy board at the end, which really just cuts off the rest of the hive from the frames. And also, when you're inspecting your bees, it's easy if you take that out. It gives you a bit of space to work with. Queen excluder, and there's a full-size queen excluder with grill and a wooden frame. We've got 2 people waiting to come in, Chris. There we go. Super box, super frames.
I can't see them, Stu.
Okay.
They're not showing on my screen.
Right. Right. All done.
Am I not? Could you make me the co-host again? Have I dropped off?
I don't think so. No, I haven't done anything. Anyway, right, and the roof. That's a single wood hive, but there are numerous variations on that theme. In the States, they used the hive named after the chap who invented the bee space, the Langstroth hive, also used in Australia and New Zealand, virtually nothing else. Even that flow hive that I showed you is based on a Langstroth hive size. Dadant, which is even bigger, it's an enormous hive. It's a Frenchman who went to America, so it's used in continental Europe and the USA. Layens, which is primarily French, but again, it went to the USA and they use a few of them there as well. Dartington, that I mentioned to you, which is a sort of multi-occupation hive. The omelette bee house, which I showed you earlier. The zest, which I showed you earlier, the concrete hive, and the national, which is the one that we advocate to start with. And as I say, you can always branch out from it. Commercial is an adaptation of the national, and it's designed for people who are keeping bees commercially, and it's the same setup as the national, just a bit bigger. And then there's the Smith, which is again very similar to the national, but those lugs on the ends of the frames are shorter. In every other way, it's the same size as the national, but you can't interchange bits between any of these hive types. Excuse me. And the Flow, the Australian one, which I told you about, they're now making a national one for the British market. If you're buying hives, you can buy hives cheaply or dearly, secondhand or new, and be sure if you're buying them to buy hives made of Western red cedar. This is a piece of Western red cedar. It's a very lightweight timber. It's used an awful lot in the United States for shingles. Those are vertical, flat tiles that clad the outside of buildings. And I purposely put in a photograph with a knot in it, because you can buy pine hives quite cheaper than the cedar hives, and this one's got a knot in it too. Pine is the generic term. It's also known as redwood, Scandinavian redwood, and it's actually known to us in the UK as Scots pine, but its Latin name is Pinus sylvestra. That's the type, but all these timbers go by multiple names. There's a timber on sale in the UK which is called tulip wood. It's actually a poplar, so it gets very confusing. But getting back to the knots, this knot, as you can see, is solid. There's no oozing or resin around it. Around this one there is, and it will ooze resin for a period of years. Both timbers have a certain degree of resin in, but this one leaches its resin, this one retains its resin, and using a hide made from western red cedar, you can get away without actually having to treat it. It will look nicer if you do, but you don't need to. Whereas with this, you definitely need to, and you would have to seal that knot before you treated it with anything. The plus is it's simple in design, and it is very easy to manipulate in comparison with a lot of other hive types. Easily transportable. It's easy to steal as well, which is a bit of a con, but you just block the entrance, put a ratchet strap around it, pick it up and move it. Simple as that. It's made to suit our climate. That's the claim. Some people still feel that they have to add extra boxes to the brood area to make it usable. It does have minimal upkeep. I do coat mine once a year, but you can just recoat them with linseed oil or something like that. They're less expensive by quite a long distance. You can buy them for as little as £159, but that would probably be pine. But 308 is the most expensive I found in flat pack. Some hive makers insist on selling them to you made up, because quite a lot of people go wrong when putting them together. And that's quite important. When you're buying new frames or new bits for your hive, they are readily available. You'll find far more national parts than you will any other hive type. What's against them? I don't think this is a real minus. You have to put them on a stand or get them up off the ground. They can be knocked over more easily than some other hive types. And if you're keeping them in areas where there are cattle or livestock in general, you have to be very wary. Pests can get in and out more easily. Not if you take precautions, but yes, I take the point. They can. And they can, between the boxes, let water in during driving rain. And some people claim it's not big enough, but as I say, you can add more boxes. That doesn't mean anything to you at the moment, but I'll show you in a second. Bottom B space is the most common nowadays. It used to be top space, but whatever you start with, keep to it, because if you've got more than one hive and one's on top B space and the other one's on bottom B space, then you get into all sorts of messes. This is a section looking through a hive. So if we took out the end wall, this is what we would see. If I start at the bottom, that oblong and that straight line are the floor, and then above it, up to that point, that's the brood box. And you have flat panels with those rails that I showed you, top and bottom. And this is where you would lift it, or there. And then above that, you've got the queen excluder in a frame. And there's the queen excluder, that thin line. And then the smaller frames in the super. And then a gap at the top and a crown board. And gaps down the sides of the frames, look. So this one is what we call bottom B space, because there is a gap between the bottom of the frame and the queen excluder, the bottom of the frame and the floor. But you would always have that. A top B space, there would be a large gap here above this bottom frame. Although there is a gap there, it's only 1/4 of an inch, but it aligns exactly with the top of the box. That's why it's called bottom B frame more than a B space more than anything. And this frame aligns with the top of the box as well. So there's our, we have a space under the crown board, down the sides of the frames, beneath the frame, beneath the queen excluder, down the sides of the brood frames, and in the entrance. And the one in the entrance is enormous because you've got bees going in and out there all the time, and they're not very likely to fill that space. They might build a little bit of wax off the bottom occasionally, but not often. And here's a box looking down on it with plastic spacers on either end. And the reason for the different colorations is that you can use them to your benefit. You've got green on one end, then and white on the other. Then if you want to turn, two more people coming in. So,
for some reason, I can't see the waiting room. Could you
okay,
let them in, please?
Don't worry, it's all right. Taken care of. Right, and those keep the frames the exact space apart. If you want to have cut comb, you put in foundation that's got no wire in it, and you can color code those to know which ones have got foundation with no wire. If you want to turn the frames around, because bees will fill this side before they'll fill that side, then you know that if the green one goes down to that end, you've turned the frame around. It's just a little code, really. But there we are, plastic spacers. And you've got double bee space in the middle there, because bees are working back to back, and single bee space at the end, because there's only one lot of bees working on that side of the frame. And at the end, you've got a dummy board so that you can lift it out and give yourself a bit of space to separate the frames before you start examining. I talked about Hoffman spacing earlier. Now, instead of having plastic spacers, the sidebars of the frames, and we're looking down from the top, are pointed on one end and flat on the next. So the next frame has a point which meets the flat, and a point which meets the flat there, and so on and so forth. It's flat to point all the way, and that keeps that distance at precisely 1/2 an inch. And this distance is 1/4 of an inch. What you can do as well is put in castellated spacers, which spaces them exactly. I'm counting. That's only 9. So this is for a super box, because you need 11 in the brood chamber. And in the super, if you space them out more like this, it will give you more honey, because the bees will build the comb out more. These are the different types of frame that are available, frame sidebars. The ones I showed you with the plastic spacers are these two, and the top bars would sit in there, and you would have plastic spacers on them. This is called a Manley frame, which is wider, and it touches the next sidebar all the way down, although the comb is distanced, but it's done all the way down. They are a bit of a devil to prize apart on occasions. And these are the Hoffman spacers. This is a super sidebar, and this is a brood sidebar, and that's a brood sidebar as well, of course. And there's the spacing built into the sidebars. And that's Hoffman spacing. And this is a close-up of the wax foundation with this cell imprint on it to give the bees a guide of where to start. And here's the wire imprinted into the frame to reinforce it into the foundation. For normal honey, if you're just spinning the honey out, you would have wired foundation. And if you were cutting out lumps of this honeycomb with you wouldn't want any wire in it, because people, I find, tend not to like eating wire. But it's thinner wax that's used for comb honey or chunk honey. And that means there's less wax and more honey for the customers. And you can, in the super boxes, use worker size cells, which these are, or if you use drone size cells, that's the male bee, as you remember, they're bigger. So the cell size is bigger. And in the supers, the queen can't get up there to lay eggs in them. So the bees will fill them with honey. If the cells are bigger, they're drone cells, you'll get more honey again in each frame than you would in worker size cells. And now this man is going to show you how to put a frame together.
This is a DM4 wax frame that fits in the groove body of a national beehive, and in this video I'm going to show you how to put one together.
He's a bit quiet, sorry about that.
Top bar, 2 side bars, and 2 bottom bars, and also your DM4 wax frame. Now, first thing to do is to get your top bar and remove the wooden splint. Just clean the gap out. And you take your top bar and lay it down, you take your side bar, push it in, and do the same with the other one. Now you'll notice on this frame that there is one flat edge and there is one pointed edge. Basically these are to space the frames out. There should be one pointing up and one pointing down. First thing you do then is you lay it on your bench. So using the gimp pins, place it on the flat edge and you put the nail in. You then have to turn it round to do the same on the opposing side. Get your bottom bars and to place them into the grooves, so they're nice and flush with the edge. You nail downwards at a slight angle, very thin, so take care while you're doing it. Then nice and flush to the edge. Second one in. Once you've got to that stage and got your 4 nails in, you take your wax. This is Premier DM4 frame wax. Get it through the gap. Sliding nicely down. Sometimes you might need to trim your wax slightly just to get it in because these frames, sometimes the wax can be a little bit too big for the frames. Yeah. The metal lugs on the bottom, that you can see there's 3 of them. You need to bend these round at a 90-degree angle. Can be quite tricky because obviously you don't want to bend the wax with it as well. Nice and snug to the bottom, and then you can see now I've bent the lugs round because we take this bar that we moved out of the top bar earlier and we push it over the top of them, which traps them. That holds the wax in place so that if it is slightly loose it won't move around. So the trick is to nail it through the lug in each of these V's that they make through the wax frame. Just tuck it in. Do 2 more. And final one. And that's your completed DM4 wax frame. This is a DM4.
There you go. That's how to do it. I actually wouldn't bang those nails down into the bar because you could damage the wax. I would go in from the side. You stand less chance of damaging the wax that way. Right, we're back to the box looking down on it. There are 2 ways of putting your boxes on the hive. You can have the ends of the bars over the entrance, which is called the cold way, or you can have the length of the bars over the entrance, and you can twist the box. It's to a large degree a matter of choice. When you're inspecting a hive, it's easiest to go in from the back, and so that you can lift up both ends of the frame. But if you go from the side, there are advantages is there that you could see the entrance. So it's entirely up to you, whichever way the box goes round, warm way or the cold way. It's called the cold way because if the entrance is there, the wind will blow in and blow straight between the frames, and it's supposedly a bit colder. If it's the warm way, if the wind is coming in through the entrance here, it's hitting the front frame, and that stops the wind from going much further into the hive, and that's the only thinking behind it. Right, stands. I said that a WBC comes with a stand. National is better up off the ground because damp can get in if they're down low. I reckon about a stand about 12 inches high is about the best height. Any taller and it becomes unstable. You can use concrete blocks. Some people use those plastic drinks cartons. I even know one guy who's built something out of scaffold poles, very substantial, and he's got a row of hives along a scaffold construction. I was talking about coating earlier. Please, please, please only coat the outside of the hive. The bees will coat the inside for you with propolis that Joe was talking about last week. They will coat the entire inside of the hive, and the pictures he was showing, everything was dark brown, all the wooden parts inside, and that's because they've been coated with propolis. Here's a hive on the top of Harrods in London. You can do all sorts of things. This is a European idea of keeping bees in bee houses, and they paint the hives different colours so that the bees can find their way home easily. I can see a couple of problems there. He's got two hives the same colour next door to each other, and he had red hives, and the only colour that bees have difficulty seeing is red. So that's a bit of a waste of time because that will appear grey to them, not red at all. Be sure that whatever you coat your hives with hasn't got any insecticides in it, because bees are insects, and if you paint them with protective coatings, some have, or a lot have, insecticides in them to stop woodworm and that kind of thing. Don't use woodworm treatment either, for heaven's sake. You'll just kill all your bees. But Cuprinol is a company, and I have no affinity to them other than they make quite a lot of products that don't contain insecticides. Their Garden Shades range is very good, as is their Duck's Back Wax product, and primarily their shed paints and fence paints, but they're very good for beehives. Where to site your apiary? This is a photograph taken in northern Spain, and these are called oreo. These buildings, they're used for storing corn and maize, as you can see here. But this is an ideal place to put starter hives. They're up off the ground, they're out of the way of pests and intruders and animals. And the whole point of these things, these buildings, is these mushroom legs, is that any rodents can't get past the mushrooms. They can get up the legs, but they can't get around them. So your hives are pretty safe up there from anything but birds and insect attackers. Just up the road, this hill here is a mountain, and just up the road from this was this. This is the mountain again, and there are some beehives. Now, it's all very well having those bees up there. They're pretty safe from anything, but getting to them is via this track, and that track's about 200-300 yards long from the road up to the beehives, and it's a footpath. So this lot has to be carried down. If you're recovering your honey or moving your hives, they have to be carried down. So site them somewhere accessible. That's the message there. And remember, you need to put them somewhere that has good forage, that's good food coming in. And I've just used Glastonbury as an example here. This is from Google, obviously, and I have no idea what Fiery Sunset is all about. But bees will travel up to 3 miles in any direction to collect food. So if we draw a 3-mile circle, you can see that they will go from Glastonbury to Street and forage virtually the whole of Street as well as the whole of Glastonbury and surrounding areas. There isn't much up here because this is out on the moors, but there's good forage all the way around here. But if you keep bees in Glastonbury and somebody has bees in Street that are diseased, they're going to meet. And that's what I was on about earlier. Be very careful. And whatever you do, avoid, especially in weather like we've just had, avoid wet areas. You don't want that to happen. And I see photographs like this every year. This looks to me to be America on the basis that these are Langstroth hives. So they tend to have very shallow roofs on their hives over there. But please just make sure that where you're putting your bees will stay dry. You need shelter from prevailing winds, so behind a hedge is ideal. Fence off the area if you've got any livestock whatsoever around, or badgers. Badgers will raid and destroy hives. Cows and horses will rub up against them, as will sheep. They're no respecters, it's just something to rub up against. And the other thing is that horses and bees don't get on too well together. They don't seem to mind cows, and they don't seem to mind sheep, cats, dogs, but horses they're not too fond of. This gives you an idea. This is the original Somerton Beekeepers Apiary. It's got a nice wall down here, and there's a fence down this side, and we had planted hedges here at that time. And the bees are spaced out nicely, able to drive down the middle and go around the back to inspect on both sides. And there are about 10 hives there, I think, at that time. We moved from there 5 years ago now, and we're in an apiary. This is not the one I'm on about. This apiary is mine, but we moved to a new apiary, which is much, much bigger. There's a sheep there, and there's a gate there, and sheep famously like short grass, and you'll keep the grass shortish around your hives. So beware of sheep in particular. And you'll see I've put a latch on this gate so that the sheep can't get in, but that one learned to open the gate, and he got in fact. So I ended up with the old traditional loop of wire around the top, which he couldn't figure out at all. And beware of falling trees. This is the same apiary, and there's the same gate, and a tree has just fallen over and just missed these hives here. And this tree also fell over about 2-3 months later. So be aware of the weather. Snow can block the entrances to the hives. You have to keep those clear, and you can do that by just putting a board up over the front. You can always put a concrete block against it if it's a bit windy, but the entrance is now clear and the bees can get in and out if they need to. And those are the same hives in warmer weather. Right, which way to face them? North, south, east or west? It doesn't really matter at all. If you've got strong prevailing winds, then you want to prevent that, of course, blowing straight in the front door. But if you have a hedge or a fence or something like that close to the hives, it will protect them from the prevailing wind. I also, in the winter, put concrete blocks on the top to stop them getting blown over. Put them at an angle to each other, or certainly not facing the same way, to avoid drifting. Now, drifting is when bees from one hive get blown into another by mistake. And leave plenty of room so that you can get in there and do your inspections and move hives without any need to stand in front of the hive, because if you stand in front of the hive, you're basically blocking the front door. And in the summer, it gets very busy and you'll just end up with bees all over your back. You need if you can, enough space for a vehicle, but at least a wheelbarrow, so you can carry stuff away and bring stuff in. And that's one way of doing it. And I think that's maybe how that Spanish beekeeper got their bees down off the mountain. If you've got two hives and they're both facing the same way, and you've got prevailing wind coming from the west, which it does in this country predominantly, the bees coming out of this hive will fly away to forage. And when they come back, they come here, but the prevailing wind could blow them past the hive and they end up going into that hive. And that means that this one is going to slowly run out of bees, and it will get very weak indeed and possibly fail. But you can get over it. If you face them different ways, then any bees getting blown out of this hive will get blown straight past. And they won't be tempted to go in this entrance because it isn't there, it's over this side. If you've got four, you can do that. Try not to put them in a row like we showed in that apiary, original apiary photograph, although those were very well spaced apart. You could also, with four hives, do that if you want to put them in a row. That means that they're all facing in different directions, and the chances of any bees getting blown into another hive are remote. Right, we've defined the hive types of hives and the parts. We've looked at frames and bee space. We've looked at the need for hive stands and apiary siting and layout. And next week, Joe will be talking about how to handle bees, personal equipment, bee suits. Somebody was asking about bee suits earlier, but we'll be talking about those next week. Tools of the trade, what you need when you go in to inspect and manipulate your bees, and preparations for hive inspection, what to look for when you get there, because it's a bit like having tropical fish when it's new to you. It's great fun just sitting and looking at them, but you need to be keeping an eye on what they're doing and why they're doing it. And swarm prevention, because the last thing you want is for a swarm to leave your hive and go off with half your bees. And not forgetting protective clothing. That's what we'll be looking at as well next week, or Joe will be, okay? I think that might be the same donkey wearing a suit. Anyway, there we go. Any questions?
Yeah, Stuart, can I ask something? You need to keep the grass short in amongst the hives. Do bees get grumpy if you go in with a lawnmower or a strimmer or something?
Yes, they do, because it makes a noise like the biggest wasp they've ever seen in their life. And I tend to wear very thick gloves. I wear very thin ones for my general beekeeping. But if I'm strimming or mowing, then I do, yes, I use quite thick gloves.
So just protect yourself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some bees don't worry about it at all, to be honest, but others do, and they get mightily upset.
Right.
Yeah. It's the keep the grass at a height that's comfortable for you, really. There are some advantages to keeping it long, but we'll talk about that week after next.
Stu,
else?
yeah, there's a question on the chat about a queen excluder from Tom White.
Okay, Tom. Where are we?
The last one, down the bottom. Shall I read it out?
Yes, but yeah, I'm not seeing it. So
Tom White says, why do you not use a queen excluder across the entrance to prevent swarming?
You can. Good question. If you well, two reasons really, Tom. You can, and it will prevent the swarming, but it'll only do it temporarily because the impulse to swarm is so strong that all you'll do is put it off and frustrate the bees. The colonies build up to such an extent that they want to swarm and split and form another colony. And there are other ways of preventing it. But when you've caught a swarm and you've got it in a box, one of the best things you can do is put a queen excluder across the entrance, because that will make sure that the new queen won't abscond from the swarm until they've settled down. But Joe will be talking about swarm control next week and how to do it other than using a queen excluder. So I won't steal his thunder on that one. But you can, if you think they're going to swarm or they're likely to, and you've got to go to work, then it's a good temporary measure.
There's another question from Anne Barnett. Are there any disadvantages of just having a single hive? I presume where is Anne? Do you mean just one hive rather than several?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I just mean if you haven't got the space, is it okay just to have a single hive?
It's okay, Anne, but if you've got room for two, it's better. If something goes wrong in one hive, if your queen dies, for instance, which does happen, or she's gone out to get mated, it's a new colony, and she gets gobbled up by swallows or birds on the way back, then you're banjaxed. He said something else, but because with no queen, it's a downward slope. If you've got another hive, you can take a frame that's got eggs in it and put it in the hive that's lost its queen, and they will raise a new queen from those eggs.
And is there a distance apart those hives have to be? Or is there an optimum distance they should be apart?
Basically, a hive is 18¼ inches square, which is about that. So you need at least that much between hives so that you can take the roof off one hive and put it down beside it. But I would go for 2-3 feet. My hives, I've got at the height of the season, I have 6, and they are in 2 rows of 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, facing different directions, and there is a gap of about 2'6" between them. The rows, that is, there's a gap of about 8 feet between the 2 rows.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Just thinking about how big my garden is and what I can cope with. So, yeah, great. Thank you.
Any more?
Yeah. Sorry, another one here.
I'm not seeing them.
Sorry. Something about someone's asking about badgers. Billy Ashford, how much of a nuisance can badgers be? I have a large population in and around my garden.
Ah, right. They can be an enormous nuisance. I've got some photographs in session 5 that basically show what happens to 2 hives that got knocked over by badgers, because especially in the winter, badgers are looking for any food they can find, and they will knock over a hive and steal all the honey and the comb. They'll destroy it. So yes, I would put stock fencing around. Clever though they may be, they can't get through 4-inch square netting.
Is that the main problem, the knocking over?
Sorry, with badgers, yeah.
Knocking over the hive's the main problem.
Sorry,
is knocking over the hive the main problem?
It's with badgers, it's knocking over and destroying the comb, and in cold weather, the bees will die from exposure.
Okay.
But an electric fence would be okay, surely. Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that where the sheep were getting into my bees, you saw there, that's 4-inch stock fencing in an orchard which has badgers running in and out of it all the time, and that prevented them. They won't dig under the wire or anything like that. They'll go for the easy meal.
Wonderful.
Terry Edser asks, can you have hives in windy areas?
Weedy areas? Yes.
Windy.
Oh, windy. You can do. Yeah, I mean, it's better not to, but if in the summer, I've taken hives to the top of Exmoor to get the heather honey, and it is very windy. I have a story about, there were a load of sheep around as well, and I'll tell you the story maybe when I meet you one-on-one. But I actually took a frame out of the hive to inspect it, and all the bees, I think they ended up in South Wales. The wind was blowing that strong, it just blew all the bees straight off the frame, and I just put it straight back in the hive immediately. I would avoid windy areas if you can. You can always put up a wind break to stop the wind hitting the hive directly.
Right, and okay. Another question from Ben Thomas. If you buy a second-hand hive, is it necessary to do any special cleaning? He says, particularly given the propolis coating from the previous colony. So that's sort of two questions, really, isn't it? Cleaning in general, and then the propolis situation.
I had a clean out here this morning, but basically, I collect propolis, I scrape it off the hives, and I mix it with rubbing alcohol, and then filter it. And because we live quite close to Glastonbury, you can sell it for about £3 or £4. Here's one of my bottles, which I use as a tester. Just a little dropper bottle, which holds 10 millilitres, 2 teaspoons full, and you can sell it for about £3 or £4. So you scrape most of the propolis off, and then in answer to the other half of your question with regard to cleaning second-hand hives, the problem with second-hand hives is you don't know if they have any disease in them, and the easiest way of curing disease is to scorch the insides of the box with a blowtorch. And by that, I mean change the color of the wood by literally scorching it so that you've got a blackish surface. And that will kill most pathogens within a beehive. It'll kill pests and predators as well, not predators, but parasites as well. It'll kill any eggs from the wax moths and that kind of thing. It's it's the best thing to do. I would never use second-hand equipment without scouring it out.
And could you comment on second-hand frames, Stuart?
Yes, I can. Sorry, Chris, missed that.
And foundation.
Second-hand frames and foundation, if they've been used previously, avoid like the plague. I wouldn't entertain using them at all. They're very, very difficult to clean, to sterilize. The wax, if you try to sterilize the wax, you'll just melt it. The frames are very, very difficult to sterilize. They're quite inexpensive. I would buy all new and start afresh. I wouldn't use second-hand frames. Never have, never will. I think I'm seeing the questions now.
Oh, well done. We've got one about the flow hive adding supers. Yeah. Have you got to that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. The flow hive and adding the supers after the rape. Yeah, you could do that. Other honeys granulate as well. So I feel very disloyal talking down the flow hive because, as I say, Stuart is another Stuart Anderson is a friend of mine, and he's even stayed with us here. But I don't think it's suited to the British climate. It's not just oilseed rape. Oilseed rape is a brassica, as are your cabbages in your garden, wild mustard, all sorts of other plants, and they're all the same family, and they will all the honeys from those will granulate quite quickly. I would avoid I would avoid rape like the plague if you're going to have a flow hive. You can get away with it. We don't have any oilseed rape near here at all, so it wouldn't be a problem. But I know lots of people who are surrounded by oilseed rape, and I hear it every April. I've got to get the oilseed rape honey out of my hive before it sets, and it's a problem for all hive types, but more so for the flow hive. Okay, I think that was your question, Steve, about the badger set.
Yeah, then we've got Duncan Moore about siting the hive.
Yeah.
Do you need to consider ventilation and cooling in the summer?
Yeah, ventilation, the wire mesh floor. The good thing about the wire mesh floor is it's pretty well self-ventilating. Mine are in direct sunlight, and with the mesh floor, it's very seldom that they feel uncomfortable, and you'll know that they're feeling uncomfortable because they'll all come out and sit on the veranda. If it's really hot, they'll coat the front of the hive, and they're out cooling down. Somebody's saying, actually, Paul Harper saying he's had an apiary on a badger set for years without a problem, but they can be a problem at times. So we've done the granulation by adding supers after the rape. Do you need to consider ventilation and cooling? Yeah, I've covered that one as well.
Well, that was the one. That was the one I just read out. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't think so. Really, it's not a major problem. No, I wouldn't bother too much about it. There is an alternative to the mesh floor. Some people still keep floors that are solid. Instead of having a mesh on the underside, they're just planks, and they swear by them. And they don't ventilate in the summer particularly. But with mesh floors, it's not a worry. I mean, I keep mine on mesh floors all the time, winter and summer, and I don't have a problem. I've lost very few hives over the winter, and it's normally through disease rather than anything else, because in an enclosed hive over the winter, it's like the coronavirus. This is the worst time of year. The same is true for beehives. If they're all cooped up watching the same television programs in the same room on the same sofa, they're going to pass diseases from one to another very easily. I picked up a very strong swarm in 2019. It gave me an enormous amount of honey within weeks of picking it up, and then died in the winter, completely died out. And that was disease. I'm pretty sure it was a disease called nosema, which is quite common. Any more for any more?
Mike Sandys asked, saying, would fence panels make suitable windbreaks? If so,
Yeah, I
how
think they
close?
would. Yeah,
How close would they need to be?
I would keep about 6 feet away, because then you've got room to move around the hive. It's this question of getting around the hive to manipulate the hive again. You need to get in there with room to move your elbows and lift hive parts up and put them down beside the hive. So about 6 feet. Any more for any more?
I think it's verbal questions now. If anyone wants to say something.
Yeah.
Stuart.
Yeah.
Eric.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can, Eric.
No,
you muted yourself.
Unmute again.
The only time I've had a problem with floors, with solid floors, I've had mold in the hive in the spring when I've had a house on a solid floor, and I've never had that with mesh floors.
Right. And mold is a problem because it carries fungal spores, and one of the disease problems with bees is fungal complaints. Rather like we get athlete's foot from damp surroundings, bees get all sorts of fungal complaints. And again, we'll talk about those in session 5. But the most common place to find mold, I find in my hives, is immediately under the roof, on top of the crown board, where a bit of moisture's got in and sat on the crown board, and it's gone moldy. Any more? No?
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, it's regarding different colonies mixing, really, and the diseases. Because where I'd like to site my hive is just underneath a wild hive. They're basically up in the soffit of my garage. And I was just wondering, if I put a hive underneath it a few meters below, if the wild hive was to have diseases, I guess they're going to mix, and all I'll be doing is trying to treat something that will perhaps never go away in that case. It's
like, having two people and one gives the other one flu, and you're treating the one that's been given the flu. Yeah, so what would you think to that? They're going to mix anyway, I suppose. Even if that hive was a mile away, I guess they'd perhaps mix. But what would your thoughts be on siting it so close to a wild hive? Is there any way you can get to the ones in the garage roof? Not really, I don't think so. No, not without being fairly destructive. It's up in the soffit, and I don't know where they go after that, but they've been there a few years now. Yeah, the feral colonies tend to last about 5 years, and then they'll either, well, they've swarmed a few times by that time, but then, excuse me, quite often they die out and they get replaced by a totally new colony, because bees attract bees. So, I mean, we put up bait hives that have old frames in them because it smells of bees and the swarm will be attracted to it. But I don't know. Have you got any thoughts on that, Eric? I would rather not, but if it's the only place
I
you've
would
got to
be,
put them,
yeah. I would be inclined to try to get them out of the garage roof.
Okay. Yeah.
It may require a bit of work, but I think it would be well worth it. And then you would have 2 colonies.
Also true. Yeah.
ever the optimist now, Eric.
I try my best.
There's a question from Sarah. What do you do if you find mould in the hive, please?
If you do find mold, depends where
Mould.
it is. A lot of beekeepers change all their boxes every year. I try to, and all you do is you put a hive right next door to yours and lift the frames out one by one, and put the bees, those frames into the new hive, the cleaned hive, and then take the old one away and slide the new one sideways to where the old one was, and the bees will watch you doing it and just go home to their new home. Then you can take the old hive away, clean it up, get rid of the mold. And I mean, the old blowtorch trick again, blowtorches kill mold. And you can then take the old hive away and give it a rub down and give it a recoat with whatever you want to coat it with. And that's how I keep my hives fresh looking every year. And after this winter, they're going to need it because they are looking a bit jaded after this winter.
Question from
How
Mike.
can we tell whether other beekeepers' hives to try and avoid crossover? Yeah, good one. The problem with that, Mike, is that a lot of beekeepers don't belong to an association, and they don't do what we ask everybody to do, which is register their bees on BeeBase. And if they're not registered on BeeBase, then they can keep bees without anybody knowing they got them. And it's quite often you just happen to see them over a hedge or something like that. And this is one of the big problems that bee inspectors have when they're inspecting bees for disease, is what other bees there are in the area. And there is no mandatory registration in this country. And I mean, a lot of people are calling for it, but it's very tricky. The government seems to have other priorities at the moment for some strange reason,
Surely
which they
not.
consider far more important. But so, yeah, there is no way of telling. Apparently, I live in Ditchett, which is near Castle Kerry, and there are allegedly 14 beekeepers in Ditchett. I know of 3 of them. So, you know, in theory, there are another 11 that I don't know about.
I mean, you do get to know by talking around. I mean, Joe, who's not at a meeting at the moment, has bees here and in another place, and we know, you know, of several other beekeepers in Pilton. You can't really avoid it, can you, Stu?
No,
you just have to be aware that your bees may be coming into contact, so which is a reason to look out for disease all the time.
Absolutely.
You can't stop them meeting their friends.
You can't break your husband for your daughter either. You know, it's the same syndrome, isn't it? Your daughter will marry whoever she wants to. Yeah.
And then go and keep bees within 3 miles of you, which is what ours has done, and our son-in-law as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It is just a case of, I mean, I inspect my bees in the summer every week, religiously. That means I do it on a Sunday morning. But every 7 days, 8 days at the maximum, and there are various reasons for that. One of which Joe will tell you about next week, which is swarming. If you 7 and 8 days are the 2 key days to ensure that your bees aren't swarming, or if they are, to do something about it. And Joe will talk about that next week. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one quick one, Stuart.
Hello, Michelle.
Hi.
I like your painting.
What about polyhives?
About what? Sorry.
Polyhives.
Can't hear you very well.
Polyhives.
Polyhives.
Polystyrene.
Polyhives.
Yeah. Right. I waited till Chris had disappeared. Chris came. Oh, she's back. Chris is very anti-plastic.
Incredibly anti-plastic.
Incredibly anti-plastic. Right, the one good thing I will say about
So am I, Stuart.
Oh, right, okay, and Eric.
Good man, Eric.
Just you and me there, Michelle. Right, polyhives have distinct advantages, and they have that one big disadvantage. They are plastic, and the upside, and I mean the downsides are obvious, but the upsides are that they're very lightweight. The hives themselves, they are the smaller versions, the nucleus boxes, which I think we showed you in session 1. The smaller polystyrene boxes for collecting swarms are extremely useful because you can lug them around and swipe a swarm of bees into them, put the lid on, close the entrance because there's an integral entrance, and put a strap around them, carry them home, and they weigh virtually nothing. A wooden box full of bees weighs quite a bit.
But I can carry a swarm box full of bees very happily. A
Which
wooden
is why
one.
every time I have a swarm, I phone Chris King and say, "Could you come and pick this up for me?"
The cardboard box works very well.
Well, Joe,
Or a skep. I very often use a skep.
Yep. Yeah, but
because you know over a sheet, you tie up the sheet around it when you coming to collect the bees, and it's like Dick Turpin's knapsack.
Yep.
Dick Whittington rather. You know, it's all tied up.
Yeah.
A bit like a Christmas pudding, I suppose.
Yeah, actually, Joe's got that in. We're stealing his thunder. It's got it in his presentation next week. How to collect a swarm. But yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages, Michelle. They are cheaper too, I think, the polystyrene full hives. They're about 150 quid, I think. Do you know different, Eric? Or?
It's about that. They are a lot cheaper than a wooden hive.
Yeah.
But they are much more fragile. I mean, you think of attacking them with a hive tool, they're not as robust.
And I wouldn't take a blowtorch to it to clean it out either.
Not a good idea.
One of our members. Sorry, Jackie.
No, go ahead.
One of our members collects swarms in a cut-down Alibaba wash basket.
Yep.
Oh,
which he rescued from a skip. He keeps looking for more.
Good man.
I collected my first swarm in a dustbin liner.
Yeah. The gentleman who said he's got a lot of badgers running through his land, it might be worth him not even considering polystyrene hives because they tear them to pieces in no time flat.
Yeah, you can clean polyhives, Michelle, but it's quite involved. You basically need a dustbin full of soda solution, and then you have to weight them down because they do like to float. So you need about 3 concrete blocks on the top to hold it down. And the soda solution will clean it and sterilize it.
Bee inspectors suggest soaking in Milton or something, don't they?
Yeah, I've heard various reports. I actually use caustic soda and bleach, but you've got to be very careful with caustic soda.
I was gonna make a joke about caustic, but I won't.
Okay. You can become very friendly with plastic surgeons if you use too much caustic soda.
Stu, you've mentioned bee inspectors a few times, but I'm not sure that you've ever introduced or explained who bee inspectors are.
No, I think again I might be stealing Joe's thunder next week.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, bee inspectors are, as their name implies, people who inspect bees. They're employed by APHA, now APHA, Animal and Plant Health Agency, which is part of DEFRA, and they're mostly employed on a seasonal basis. And there are a bundle of seasonal bee inspectors, and then you get regional bee inspectors. And our regional bee inspector lives near Taunton. His name is Simon Jones. He's the bee inspector for the whole of the South, or chief bee inspector for the whole of the Southwest. But he has seasonal bee inspectors working for him who, if you call them and you've got a problem, they will ask you to describe it, and because they're quite busy, they may ask you to take photographs. And if they think that the photographs show that you have got a problem, or your description does, they will come round and free of charge, completely. It might cost you a cup of coffee and a chocolate biscuit, but they will go through your hives absolutely free of charge and tell you if there is anything wrong. And they will make helpful suggestions as well, generally about your bees, because they're beekeepers. My local one around here, although she's not responsible for my area, is Meg Seymour, who lives in Wells. And Meg's a lovely girl. She does occasionally, if they're not busy, she'll phone me up and say, Stuart, how many colonies have you got at the moment? And I'll tell her, say, oh, can I come and inspect them to make up the numbers? Because they have to inspect a certain amount of hives. And I get a free inspection from Meg on a reasonably regular basis. But Simon Jones is my appointed one, because he works as a seasonal bee inspector as well. He'll drive up from Taunton and go through my bees if I think I've got a problem. And they're very accommodating.
You say it only cost you a cup of tea, Stuart. May I tell you a funny story about my visit from Meg? Cup of tea, piece of cake. You say it only cost you a cup of tea. It cost me a vet's bill because I put the cake on the side, went to offer Meg another piece. In the meantime, the dog had eaten it, and because it was full of raisins, that was a £75 trip to a vet. So if you're feeding a bee inspector fruit cake, keep it out of the way of any dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. They're lovely people. I mean, and they'll tell you some wonderful stories about other beekeepers as well, and how badly they keep their bees, but they never tell you who they are.
Question come up from Mike. Stu, can you see that?
No, Mike, not at all.
Can you read it out? Read it out.
Yes, sorry. Is there any danger bee inspectors can bring in contamination or disease? Absolutely not. Nothing is cleaner than a bee inspector. They arrive, they've got in the back of their car a big bucket. They've also got a large can of soda solution, a pair of wellies, and several bee suits and boxes of disposable gloves. And they will put on a clean bee suit for your inspection. They'll put their wellies on. They have a big brush and they will brush their wellies with soda solution. And then they will go inspect your bees. And when they've finished, they'll take their gloves off and throw them away. They'll take their bee suit off and put it in a bag for washing. They won't wear that one again that day. Their boots then are disinfected again. And they decontaminate themselves before they leave your property. So there's absolutely no chance whatsoever. I mean, they can spot disease in a beehive that you won't find. I mean, even if you've become very good at spotting it, they'll spot one cell in a whole hive that's got a problem. They're excellent. They're brilliant.
Yeah.
I think you might have. There might be Simon Jones down your way too, Mike. He lives down your way. Any more?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, they are, Mike. Okay. Yeah. Somebody's having a lot of fun with WhatsApp on my phone, I think, this evening.
Oh, is that what it is? I couldn't work out what it was.
I'm not going to look.
Stuart.
Yes, John.
You were saying about inspecting your bees once a week. What about if you were going on holiday?
Right, you need a friend.
Yeah.
Or don't go on holiday in the summer. We go to Australia and New Zealand because that's where my stepson and his wife live, and my wife's sisters. So we go November when it's hot in Australia and cold here, and consequently we're away for a month. And normally at the beginning of winter, there's no need to inspect your bees that regularly. I've got a neighbour who will pop round and make sure they're all still standing up and nothing's blown over. but you really don't need to examine in the winter. Having said that, not everybody's going to go to Australia and New Zealand. If you're going on holiday in the summer, if you're going for 2 weeks, if you inspect them immediately before you go, and if you can find somebody who would just come in and have a quick wander through them middle of your holiday, then you can inspect them when you get back.
Okay.
But summer holidays and beekeeping in large numbers don't go well together.
It's actually quite a good idea to have a bee buddy if you can. So you do the bees together. So if one of you's away, the other can look at the bees.
So you could share bees.
And it gives
Yeah.
absolutely, and it gives someone to bounce ideas off. If you open it up and you're not sure what's going on, the other person can throw up a few suggestions.
That's great. Thank you.
The other thing you can do is, if you have to go on holiday in the summer, is make certain the bees have got plenty of room for putting honey and nectar in, even if it means putting another empty nuke, not nuke, super above a crown board with the feed hole open. I had that tip from Margaret Thomas years ago. She and her husband went to Morocco in May, which they were keeping bees on oilseed rape in Essex. It was not a good idea, but it's a way of trying to delay things if you have to be away.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed, but it's, if you have got somebody you can look at, and it's like the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the other advantages, isn't it, of becoming a member of a division, that you do get to know people living near you.
Yeah.
Who are also beekeepers, rather than just being a beekeeper, a sort of standalone beekeeper. And you know who you can phone, and you know who lives nearby.
It's
Most beekeepers are forthcoming with help when it's needed.
Yeah.
I know when the times when you've needed some help, there's always somebody that will help. It's they're a good breed of people.
I've got to move all my bees before the 1st of March because I had a fire in my timber workshop last August. They're finally going to rebuild it, but it's right next to my beehive, so they've all got to move, because not only do horses and bees not mix, builders and bees don't mix. They're the biggest wusses under the sun. Jackie knows that from experience as well. She went to a building near Bridgewater that they found bees in the roof, and they were all running around like.
Yeah.
I go to the top of a 4-story building through the scaffolding because the men were too scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, a very, very friendly, very nice man whose wife is here this evening, but he's not. He's at the parish council meeting. Is going to put them in his apiary for a week or so while it's being rebuilt. So.
Good old man.
Good old Joe.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, Alison Dykes.
Is that in North Wootton or in Gabriel's Orchard?
North Wootton.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's North Wootton. But anyway, and at the moment, I've also, if you've got problems with moving bees, you can put them in isolation. And Gabriel's Orchard that Chris was on about there, I've got one colony in Gabriel's Orchard at the moment in Pilton, which is waiting for that building to be built so that I can bring them back here. But, so yeah, people they're very friendly. They'll accommodate you. They'll help.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the bee buddy idea there actually is Eric keeps his bees with a chap called Nigel, and the two of them basically share the bees and the profits, I believe. So, any other questions? If you've got any more, you can always email Joe or myself at any time. So feel free to do that. I get a few emails, and I don't mind responding to them at all. And I know Joe doesn't.
No problem. I'm speaking for him, but I know that he would say that.
Stuart, I've got a problem that's not exactly beekeeping, but I missed last week and don't know where to go to get the video that you say you recorded.
You've just done it. I'll send it to you, Duncan. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
No problem. Yeah, last week's I've had problems with the first session. If you're on an iPad, the first session is very large if anybody wants that. So I've turned it into what's called a WMV format, which is okay on PCs, but it doesn't work on iPads. But last week's session is MP4, which works on iPads or PCs, so that's okay. Yeah, I'll just write that down, otherwise I'll forget, and I'll make sure you get that. I'll won't be till the morning. Right. Sorry, a friend of mine once, when I was sales repping many years ago, he worked for the same company. I had a phone call from a customer at 10 o'clock at night saying, I need to see you. And he said, well, it won't be till tomorrow. So yeah, I'll send you the video tomorrow, Duncan. Okay.
Could you put Stu, could you put our Nicola on there as well,
Yeah,
please?
sure. Yeah.
Because she had to leave before the end. And there's a new message.
Nicola wants this one.
Video.
Then.
Yeah, today. There's a new message from Michelle saying, do the BKA match new members with a mentor? Not the BKA.
Sorry. Sorry, Beekeeping Association. Yeah, we are Somerton Beekeepers Association. We've thrown these beginner sessions open to anybody and everybody, really, because so few associations are holding courses of any sort this year. So there are people from Chepstow, there's somebody from Bristol, Watermanor Edge, Cornwall. And there was one in Whitley Bay, but he's seen the error of his ways and he's now moved to Somerset. So, and there are people from different divisions of Somerset beekeepers here as well. There are people, Paul Harper, who's been answering some questions, is from Central Division. John Ryder, who's on my screen, lives in Frome. Duncan, you're in the Somerton area, but there are people from all around Somerset who will be breaking off and joining different divisions other than Somerton when we finish these sessions. And then it's down to those divisions, really. Finally got round to answering the question, who will be the people to approach. Michelle, where are you?
I'm in Ilminster and I have joined.
Okay,
Somerton.
so you'd be joining Somerton then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can try and find mentors for you. There's a guy in Ilton who comes to mind who is very keen, and I think he'd be very keen to help.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all right. I mean, when the time comes, when you're thinking of getting your bees, let me know, and I'll also. Did you get a copy of the newsletter with the notes? Yeah. I mean, that's where we would ask for mentors in the newsletter. Also, I've thrown Eric in at the deep end before now and said, you're close to these people. Would you be prepared to look after them? Sorry, not enough red wine. People will. I mentored, I think he's gone now, but Peter Derbyshire at a distance through 2020. I mean, when I started, Joe was at the end of a phone whenever I wanted him. And
Joe currently, I think, is mentoring 7 people.
Is that all?
I know. Yeah, I think that's right.
He's very
just done a quick head count.
Yeah.
So he's quite a busy chap, particularly in the summer.
Yeah.
But he really enjoys it because he loves helping people, and he really enjoys seeing those beekeepers grow in confidence, all the way through the first summer when they have their bees, and several beekeepers who he's mentored in the past have gone on to be, really cracking beekeepers and are now mentoring other people. So, it's lovely, really nice.
It is. it's lovely to see people get the joy out of it that you experience, and start to. I mean, I'm still totally fascinated by them. Every time I open a hive, I think, oh right, you know, and you start to read the hive and see what they're doing and why they're doing it, and if you're not very careful, you also end up having conversations with them, which is a bit worrying. But it's you know, you have to go and tell them when somebody's died as well. And unfortunately, they've been receiving a lot of bad news lately. But we've had quite a few of the older beekeepers drop off the perch this last year. But yeah, it's. I mean, if you were closer, Michelle, I would offer. But you know, you're quite a way away from me. But I mentored, as I said, mentored Peter last year, and also finding, I mean, swarms. If it's a swarmy year, then I've started to make a list of people wanting swarms and nucleus colonies. Kira Klass, one of the beginners, has asked about buying bees, and I've had a word with another beekeeper who's selling 4 colonies. So there are always bees available somewhere. So, and always somebody who's prepared to look over your shoulder as well.
Yeah. Joe and I were talking this morning at the apiary about the possibility of making up some nuclei from the apiary hives for new beekeepers. So we ought to be able to have a few available for people there. And if the person at Ilton isn't available for any reason, Ilminster's not too far away from me.
Oh, right. There you go. You've just earned a new Uncle Eric.
Oh dear.
Right.
My father always told me never volunteer.
Yeah. That's how we got here, Eric, both of us. Right. I'm going to conclude in a minute, unless there are some more questions, because we've been going for 2 hours nearly.
You've got a cork to pull, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yes. I don't want to do it, but apparently it's good for me. So.
Absolutely. St. Paul said.
Right. Okay. Duncan, I've got the note there and I'll attend to that in the morning. And right, I'm going to wish you all a good evening. If anything else you want to ask, just email myself or Joe, and we will respond.